Let's now move on to the main program, and that is learning about the history of marquetry through somebody who's eminently accomplished. I mean, he wins awards in designing wood, he's won awards all across the place. We're talking to him about why there was nothing to be seen. Look at the walls behind him right there. Do you see any marquetry in there? He said, no, it's all in galleries or in people's walls. The guy has had tremendous success, and he's going to share with us through the slideshow the history over time. He's going to have pieces to show us and tools to show us. And without further ado, Paul, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. I'm going to my screen share right now. I know it's been disabled on your end, so we'll need to do that in order to do the slideshow. Can everybody see me and hear me?
We can see you, but we haven't heard. Keep talking.
Okay, well, let's keep going here. I see that my microphone is transmitting. Are you receiving? Raise of hands. Okay, I get everybody on the Zoom raising hands. Anybody else? Yeah, good. Got everybody on Zoom. How about there at the hall?
This is a challenge.
Okay. Still talking. I know it's recording right now, and I can share. I'm not able to share screen quite yet. So it's been disabled on your side. So the host needs to enable my participant sharing screen in order to continue. Can anybody in the hall hear me? Oh, good. All right. Can you see anything yet? I could just see me. I would like to share my screen. There we go. Got it. Okay, well, let me let you know here. I'm going to...
Just so you know, this is our very first attempt at doing this kind of event, so patience in the room, please. Thank you.
All right, well, I'm gonna just speak to you now. I don't know, you can probably see me in the small window, but I've had the pleasure of presenting for the San Diego Fine Woodworkings Association a few times in the past. I still continue to teach, although I took 1.5 years off during this COVIDious time that we had, and I decided to relocate part of my operations to Hawaii, of all places. I still maintain a shop in Santa Barbara, and I'm setting up some digs here with an 1,800 square foot building located on a cliff overlooking the ocean. So that is my intention, and that's where I'm speaking from right now. So does everybody hear me? Yeah. Ah, good, excellent. All right, well, I just want to give you a little bit of background about me and how I got involved with woodworking. But as a young man, I traveled to Switzerland when I was 15 years old to join a school for making pianos and church organs. My father was Swiss, mother was American, so I was raised a little bit in both countries. And when my family decided to give me an education, they opted for a European trade versus the American school system. I still thank them for that because now I have a good trade, which I'm able to use all over the world. From church organs, which was a 4.5-year apprenticeship and a 1-year apprenticeship, continuing apprenticeship in piano building, I went to boat building. That came a little bit later, where I went to Lowestoft, England to learn the art of the fair curve. I mean, us as woodworkers, we know that straight lines and table saws, they all cut straight lines. We join straight lines, but it was the curve that had always fascinated me. And in this way, I was able to incorporate some of these techniques of boat building with church organ building, and I've applied them now to furniture. My internship in Switzerland did lead me to Italy at a point in the future where I decided that I wanted to study marquetry or surface decoration. And I figured I got to one of the best, which was in northern Italy. It's a shop which was well known for all of its marquetry and being a kind of a hub of Europe. So that's where I did my internship with Franco Ramonti and the whole clan there. They're still very good. Communication between us. Last year, Luca came over to work with me on a very large project, and I still continue to have ties over in Europe where this trade is still very much alive and well. So with that, you know, I learned a lot of traditional work, of course, with the marquetry. And then when I came back to United States, I decided to branch out on my own and do something different. We'll get to that a little bit later in the program, but right now I want to go and do my presentation, which is marquetry, then to now. So, you know, it started a long time ago. We'll say, you know, King Tut, even 1300 BC. All these pieces that were made by shaping small pieces of wood and assembling them together like a big jigsaw puzzle. The instrumentation was crude. They didn't have any machines, of course, but a lot of the work that we saw back then was made with small individual pieces and put together like a parquetry. But as you can see from the tools that they had, it wasn't a whole lot. These were recovered from a tomb, and they go back way long ago. So a couple, 3,000 years before Christ. So a lot of those tools hadn't changed throughout the time, and surprisingly, made it into some things that we even use today. When I talk about history of marquetry, also, one of the main things is veneer. Veneer is wood, we know that, comes from trees. But what is veneer? Well, veneer is actually a valuable wood, a thin piece of valuable wood, stone, metal, shell, or whatever we might have, and applying it over a substrate which is stable, that keeps it from falling apart, like a piece of plywood or MDF or solid wood or other stone. So that's the idea of veneer. And when we talk about marquetry, we talk about the thickness of veneer. Way back when, veneer was not made to withstand, this is how it was done. Now, if you can imagine, these two guys can probably get pretty tired after a while, and they can actually cut 1/8 of an inch veneer pretty well, pretty regularly. When you get trained, you do that. It was a very cumbersome way to do it, but it worked. Now, of course, we have these large mills, and these large veneer mills, mostly located in the eastern area, North Carolina, Indiana, the places that you have trees, or in Canada. There's also a lot of mills over in Germany and Indonesia, but these things are capable, like this plant, of cranking out 4 million square feet of veneer a day. The only way they can really do that is to soak the wood, to boil it, to slice it up with a guillotine, probably 1 sheet a second. And you can mill veneer from 1/4 inch thick in this way. That's kind of difficult. You can only do it with certain species, but you can regularly get 1/8 of an inch veneer down to something which is only 1/1000th of an inch thick, thinner than a piece of paper. The wood can be so thin, you can hold it up to the light and light will shine through it. You can put it over a piece of newspaper and you could read through it. That is how thin it is. I'll show you the proper applications of that next, further on this slideshow, but we're looking at the range of veneer and sort of the history of veneer making, how it has come to the present time. So way back when, okay, we're talking, we're getting into the 1000-year AD. Again, we kind of see the same pattern of doing small little pieces and assembling them. There would be intricate carving and all of that made in this particular piece, but all the marquetry was assembled from smaller pieces. Here was maybe some of the first examples of religious inlay or inlay marquetry for the church. And this would be made by a knife and digging out the background and inserting a piece of wood. And this, as you can see, is actually also engraved. So they've taken the wood, they've scratched out facial features, and after pre-finishing the wood with shellac, they would put ink in there to make facial features or lettering. stuff that was too hard to inlay. So we progressed on to other things here a bit further on. This was some saint, some guy, some saint, some soldier. And you can see by the use of wood grains that they're starting to utilize the wood grains to show motion and flow of the robe and the arm. And they're usually for the white, there would be a piece of ivory in there or a piece of bone. Again, the ecclesiastic work or work on walls or religion was the churches was a big driver of this technique. And here you can see a combination of different pieces that are put together and shaped and glued together onto a foundation and surfaced. One of the things that was really valued, it was that it took so long to do, and it became something that only the churches or royalty could afford. So shoulder knives, surprisingly, only came around by the early 1400s. The shoulder knife was, as you can see here, I'm just going to do a check-in. Is everybody okay? Can everybody see me? Are the transitions going smoothly?
Yes.
Excellent. Good. I'm glad to hear it. We were wondering whether the transitions would work. But going back on shoulder knives, as you can see, it's braced off the shoulder and you can get some leverage. You can actually go right into wood. You can go down a depth of a 16th inch on your first pass. An adaptation of that was taking the shoulder knife and with a little mallet, you can drive it around. Sometimes when we take apart old furniture, you can see the incision lines into the background where they glue pieces, they're incising and they're adding like a big jigsaw puzzle, piece by piece. You can only imagine how long that took. So now Barelli was an Italian, 1490. He took, this is a self-portrait, by the way. He took the veneering to a whole new level. This is when perspective was starting, depth, shadowing. He understood these things and he wanted to make realistic panels that you would go up and you would try to open them, but find that those panels are already open. It was inlay. This was an old art form and it was something that was done. He was very well versed in it. And you can see by some of the detail. Now this panel is about, I've seen it myself, it's about 2 foot by 4 foot. So this is actual or real life size. The escutcheons on the doors, those are life size. So it was really masterfully done. So word got out, Barelli, he wasn't working for the churches. He did commission work. But then there was this guy called Fra Giovanni. Now, Fra Giovanni, he said he's going to take it to a whole new level. This guy was in an order of monks, and he did some amazing work. As you can see, the perspective of these panels, some of his work is truly revolutionary at the time. The Germans had their go at it. This was also using knives and small pieces, but you'll always see that most of the work was assembled, or it was commesso. It was put together by a number of smaller items. About 1670, the donkey was born. Now, the donkey was a way of being able to hold the wood, a piece of wood, and saw it with a fret saw to cut out these pieces piece by piece. That was a revolutionary thing. It was kept secret for many, many years because it was like a trade secret. How do you do it? Well, the advantage was that they had this Chevrolet or they had this donkey, which about 100 years later turned into a Chevrolet. Now, many of you know this guy, right? Especially his dog. I know his dog. So Patrick and I go back a ways, but the Chevrolet had the distinct advantage of having this mechanical arm on the side that always allowed you to cut parallel. That was really key because if you can see the guy up here on the right, he has a fret saw, but he has to be very, very skilled in holding that perpendicular and 90 degrees to be able to get a good edge on that piece of marquetry. The Chevrolet made it much easier. It still had the foot clamp, but it is still in use today. At least that's what Patrick uses. So with that, there all of a sudden started to be other forms of cutting marquetry. Here was a spring top saw, again, with a pedal, and that was made, maybe that was used on this piece. That was a piece of Dutch marquetry, a cabinet fit for kings, ivory, wood, ebony, sometimes shell, sometimes chagrin, which is a shark leather. So a lot of these things became possible to do, these elaborate pieces where your background was filled up with all these different images, truly elaborate and time-consuming furniture. Now we finally figured out how to make veneer. Okay, this was the first step. These were sawn veneer, and it was made by a saw blade moving back and forth, possibly, driven by a windmill or some kind of like a water mill, that you would be able to make a contraption that would actually cut veneer for you. This veneer would be traditionally maybe about maybe 3/32 to a 1/16 of an inch thick. It was reproducible. It made consistent thicknesses. It removed the necessity of having a skilled master cutting the veneer, and it made veneering much more economically feasible. So let me explain a little bit about the stack cutting technique. Marquetry can be divided into several different categories. And marquetry, really, all that means is making recognizable images out of wood. So, there's certainly piece by piece method, there's stack method, there's a laser method, there's a conical cutting method. And I chose this particular method of stack cutting because it allowed me to yield the results that I wanted to do in a very quick and efficient manner. This is how it's done in Italy. You have a cartoon on the right. Can everybody see my cursor here? Yes. Okay, good. So we have this cartoon, and we have a bunch of different layers of veneer symbolizing I'm going to have a background out of walnut, I'm going to have maple as a flower. I'll have these two as leaves. I'm going to have another wood for the ribbon. And what I'm going to do is make a stack. The background is here. All the veneer is here as well. Now, you'll notice that I have it covered with this white tape. It's called gum tape. It's a very thin paper with a hide glue on it, and it keeps the veneer together while you're cutting it. This was a secret that was done many years ago. Well, it was ancient actually, that was covered with hide glue and a very thin paper, and it actually held the veneer together through the cutting process, which is kind of violent. Anyway, creating a stack, pinning the stack together, and cutting out with a scroll saw. I'm using a more modern day scroll saw. It's actually a Delta spring top. This machine is maybe 60 years old, but you can still find them today. It's a great saw. And you'll notice that I'm cutting all the stacks of veneer at the same time. Once I pull everything apart, I have the cartoon over here with the background with all the waste veneer, and I have all the veneer in the various stacks here. Here's the stem, there's parts of the flower, which I then can sandshade to burn some of the edges, to assemble everything on tape or on some kind of like a adhesive surface. In the old days, hide glue was used, hide glue and paper. Now I have the advantage of this wonderful stuff called 3M 2090 long mask. It's blue tape, the same stuff painters use. It's great stuff. Gum tape everything together, peel off the tape, and I have a pattern of one skin that's ready to apply onto my substrate, whatever that might be, to create my marquetry picture of a rose. So the real secret to marquetry is really having a good drawing. Drawings have been made for a long time. I find that they're a very good key. From that, you can actually make an image, and you can actually make very elaborate images and keeps track of all the parts, everything that you need to do. It's your guide or your template to do your pattern, however simple or however complex it is. So let's go back to history a little bit. So evolutions of the spring top saw, as you see, what really defined the saw and being able to work in patterns was the size of the throat. The size of the throat here is from here all the way to the blade. So that's your throat size. You can't swing a panel around in there that's bigger than that. Otherwise it'll hang up on the side. But this was a very good way to be able to have this spring top. It was easily operated and you could steer this blade through your Marquetry packet. This is yet another rendition where it was a foot pedal with a spring top. This was deemed a very good system, which then was mechanized and driven by either a motor or a belt or a windmill or a motor when they came into being. The advantage of this one is, think about it, this blade, where is this blade going and why is it superior to this one? Well, the throat size is still from here, the blade to the back, but on this one, you bolt it to the roof and you get essentially a saw that has a throat depth from the blade to your nearest wall. There you go. So that's Pat's saw. I think that was before he moved it, but the saw blade from here to the nearest wall is that's about 6 feet. So he could work a panel that large. I just wanted to let people know if you have any questions, you can either type them into the chat. And for those people that are in the room, I guess you can have a show of hands and Travis will get your questions and we can answer them at a breaking point. The French, 1670, started to get more elaborate. The royalty was coming in. Let the workers, the indentured service, they would work, their whole family and their whole compound could work a lifetime. This was made from pewter and tortoiseshell and gold and precious materials. It was a wall sconce amongst hundreds of wall sconces. So the scope of the work was truly, if you've been to Europe, if you go to Italy, I guarantee you will be blown away by the amount of work which exists in the Pitti Palace, in a lot of the museums, the Louvre. That's a good example of all this fine work. So we're coming up on 1670. Now, I'm not going to go through where all the wars and all the different things happened, but we're getting to a time where it's, there's a lot of conflict out and through a lot of these times. This is a beautiful cabinet, rosewood interior. The blue on the right, that's chagrin. There's pewter. I like this from the sense of style. You can see that China, there was a Chinese influence that started to come here. If you look at the hinges, the pattern here, some of this is beginning to be influenced by other areas as ships started moving back and forth. Think of the exotic woods that would be loaded onto a lumber sailing ship in Africa and brought back. England doesn't, England and Europe don't have any mahogany, but yet there's this furniture which exists way back then. So as commerce started, the ideas started to come forth. There was more and more cross-pollination of techniques and of imagery. Here's one of Charles Boule and his sons. Now that spanned more than 100 years, but the quality of work and what he was able to do was really over the top. And I doubt whether there's many people that would be capable of doing this today. And if so, it would take years. Here's a sample of one of his cartoons. There was a piece that was realized from it, from cartoon to wood. So one of the things I notice here on this edge here, this needed a particularly large saw because I have no interrupts, I have no breaks here. I can't break the panel down into components to work them on a smaller machine. So this tells me that this was made with a larger machine. If you look at this image right here, this is a leg, and probably from here to here is maybe 3 inches. So if you see the detail work between the horn and the pewter, it is something which is, I would say, very challenging to do. They were still of a mind that more is better. If you look at these lines up here, it was just, it's not my style. I don't like it. You know, it's filling up way too much background with stuff. Your eye has nowhere to rest. So it's not a style I like. I've been called to do it, but it wouldn't be something I would do on my own. Jean-François Aubin, he started making mechanical tables. This was one that was, look at the drawer size. I mean, my goodness, say go over the top on this. So this top came off, there were secret compartments. Also, you could, you know, the work was impeccable. I've seen that piece at the Getty Museum, and it's still in immaculate shape. Now, of course, it's had a few restorations over the years, and it's all done traditionally. So, but it's in surprisingly good condition. This is the top. You notice something about old marquetry too. Here's something. It all seems to be a little bit brown. You know, this was much darker. This was probably a very, very dark palisandro or mahogany, and this was a light holly. So it all, with age, wood tends to migrate towards a honey brown color. It goes that direction. Darker woods become lighter, lighter woods become darker. They fade with UV. It just is what happens. If you have thick veneer, you can sand it back, or you know, but you certainly can't do that on the veneers that are being made today. There are better lacquers today that keep the color, but generally I advise people, if you have an old piece, keep it out of the sun, keep it humidity controlled, and the colors will change very little. David Runkin was another one. He started making very elaborate mechanical systems. There's enough to see on YouTube of how a lot of these work, which involved a cabinet maker, a marquetarian, and a clock maker, and a steel worker. All those trades got involved. There was also a bronze monger, somebody who did all the bronzes. Henry Reisner, another big name. Again, this is sort of like late 1700, early 1800s. He made mechanical desks. Look at this marquetry panel here. You see this big crack going through it? Can everybody see that? That is due to maybe a substrate that wasn't very good. The substrate shrank. So as he glued this on top of a piece of spruce that was renowned for its stability, yeah, give it a couple of 100 years. It's going to do something. Today's day, we have things like plywood, MDF, and other substrate materials, which will guarantee this kind of thing doesn't happen in the future. I know that back then in 1700s, if there was plywood or a good MDF that existed, one that was not pre-war, stuff that was made with waterproof glue, they probably would have used it. But moving on, I would like to digress slightly into pietre dure, which is stone marquetry. This is happening about the same time in Florence, in Italy. There is some crossover into the woodworking industry, which I'll explain in a minute. But if you look at these panels, these are all stone. This goblet and this panel here, this goblet, I've seen that in real life. It is actually about 6 inches tall. When you look at it on this surface, it is immaculate. Every piece of stone here is different and selected for its shading or coloring within the stone itself. You see how this gradient, it's light here and it goes to a dark. This was selected stone that was cut apart with a wire saw and assembled. A panel like this would have taken 2 men about, I would say, about 5 or 6 years to do. That's the amount of patience and work which is involved in stone marquetry. I found it fascinating when I went to Italy. I saw some of this stonework and I said, I have to learn it. I need to learn it. The thought of spending 16 years on one project, I wasn't wild about that, but I needed to learn the technique from my teacher, Signor Clementi. He was born before World War I. He didn't quite know how old he was, but he remembers World War I as a young man. And he taught me this pietatore, and he's using the same technique that they've used for centuries. It's a bow saw with a iron wire, and on that iron wire is silicon carbide paste. It's like a carbide paste that you use to cut the stone, and it takes forever. I had my chance to do it, but you know, I did this panel here. I've done several projects, but this is probably the most complex one that I've ever done. And it was a ruby, zyside, and aventurine panel in a cabinet. What you're looking at is about 2 feet, 20 inches tall, and about 6 inches wide. It took me 6 months. So I certainly have respect for the way that they did it back then. And generally, I do teach classes occasionally, but I don't do it much anymore because it just takes so much time and so much patience and so much ability to forgive and to move on that I find wood marquetry to be something I'm more interested in. As you can see here, this is all translucent. There's actually light inside this cabinet that's shining through the stone out into the space that it occupies. A challenging project indeed, but moving on, I had something else here. This is a Thistle Cabinet. This is another one, and as you can see, it's a jewelry cabinet. This has lots of drawers. This is using my design element of called, it's sort of an unusual hardware placement. And I like this cabinet for that hardware. I mean, where am I going to find square knobs like that? The client that commissioned this cabinet found these over in England. And the stone thistle marquetry was a mirror image on one side of the door to the other. Let's move back to 1860. The velocipede. I think you've all seen this at the show. I think there's one was on display there, and it was about this time. I know they kept on making them up until about 1920, 25 maybe. And this allowed other small shops like the Herder Brothers to do their marquetry. This was a couple of German transplants that ended up on the East Coast, and they made pieces that were absolutely over the top, fantastic. If you could look at the carving and embellishments on the legs, they were really quite extraordinary, exceptional pieces of furniture. Most of them are in museums, but there's occasionally ones that are found out in the private sector. So when looking at some of the, okay, here's 1900 James Lamb, that was also part of the Herder Brothers. And I was looking at this design and looking at it, I started drilling down. Notice something weird about this design. It looks like, you know, what is this apron down at the bottom and this gallery down here? You know, the legs, I mean, I was looking at it and it says, wouldn't that be better? That was probably like this. And somebody got the idea that it actually could be like this. So serendipitous design. You know, when you're in the shop and you look at something, you go, wow, that's kind of cool. I wonder what that could make. So I think that's the story with this one. I haven't had James Lamb confirm that, or anybody else or any of his descendants, but I think that that's maybe what happened there. Ruhlmann, also somebody who is very iconic and definitive in the trades of marquetry. He did a lot with ivory and ebony. He was known for his Art Deco. A lot of this Art Deco design work during that time was his forte. And I do believe Frank is still on the East Coast. He's still doing it. He's making Ruhlmann type furniture and he's doing quite well at it. Émile Gallet on the Art Nouveau. back in France, where this was the new design to make everything organic and feel and in shape. I tell you what, you know, table saw can only come limited handy with this, but it was all about profile planes, a lot of carving, and a lot of sanding. Is Veneer, also one that, like Ruhlmann, started to make these Chinese-inspired cabinets, and also Art Deco, bringing in elements here from around the globe. Vassiliev, he did this one. Look at that portrait on the left, but when you look closely to the portrait on the right, you can see his eye. This was the photograph that convinced me that I will never do portraits. I'm not going to do it. I refuse. And I'll tell you a little bit later about what's just happened, but at that point, that changed me. I just said, I'm not going to do this. That looks like way too much work, and it's way too finicky for me. Ah, the modern day scroll saw. Dewalt, great scroll saw. I did a review on it, and Fine Woodworking, I gave it thumbs up. It's a great little saw. All the controls are there. It's good. The only disadvantage I see is the throat size, only being 20 inches. Well, back in Italy, we had these suckers, which are more like 4 to 9 feet. Let's see, 4 to 9 feet here. This was a much larger one, and they all hold a small 4-inch straight blade, which is a 2/0 or a 2/0 blade. So these were the machines that all the production marquetry now is taking place on, machines like this. This is my earlier tool, which was a Delta Milwaukee spring top saw, which was one of the best saws that I ever owned. I was sad to see it go, but I replaced it with a saw that had a bigger throat. I got started in marquetry when I came back to the States by doing reproductions and reproduction repairs. This was a cabinet that I got that did not have an oak door. Whatever happened to the oak door, we don't know. Maybe 100 years ago, maybe 50 years ago, there was a ding, it was taken off, given to a finisher, and his shop either moved or something happened. So I was given the task of making a new door. So with that, I decided to put a piece of transparent plastic in this void here and make a cartoon. This cartoon, then I could copy the reverse, make a marquetry pattern, and actually come up with a door that looks like this. That really got me started with doing marquetry for the reproduction trade. And I decided now that I had a viable skill that paid me more than $5 an hour. So Italian production marquetry, here we have, oh, let's go back here. Let's try to see if it's going to light up for us. Yes. Oh, come on. Let's go back. Let's try it again. Will it work? Yes, there we go. Now there may be some sound with this, and I'll let the sound play. Did you see, I'm sorry that it clicked out again for some reason. Let's just look at that again.
The video is kind of choppy, Paul. I don't think
it's kind of choppy. Okay. All right, well then we'll move on. If the video is choppy, I just wanted to show everybody, did you see the man and how close that arm was from his forehead? My teacher could work with that. It would be like about 1/8 of an inch away all day, because that was his best vantage point, and he had no scars on his forehead. Patrick Lejeune, Patrice and Patrick, as you well know, down from San Diego, has done exemplary work of antiques and continues to thrive down there. Other people like Silas Kopp, who you may have heard of, has taken the boule technique from from France, and he applies it to furniture, which is really, the quality is quite astounding. If you look at some of this here, where he's using shape and form to create these unusual lines and cohesive pieces that are designed very well. I was very influenced by Silas's work. He's about 10 years ahead of me in doing, marquetry. So I've gained a lot of inspiration and from his work, and to see that it's moving forward. My work is, of course, a bit different, but he was very inspirational for me, a modern master. Laser marquetry is there. You can make things out of lasers by programming and putting on a table. I have found, however, that I've used marquetry for laser in a few places myself. And that would really be, but I'll show you those pictures in a moment. William Tunberg, who lives in the Los Angeles area, has been doing laser marquetry for many years, many decades, as long as lasers have been around. And he does these modern collages that are cutting these random shapes and then putting them back underneath to be recut and recut and recut until he has this pattern which is pleasing. You always notice laser marquetry by this telltale sign of burning between two layers of wood, especially noticeable between white and another layer of wood. Here you don't see it because it's all dark. That's how you can tell if it's been cut with a laser. This is laser assist. Well, what I mean by that, there's certain components of this table that was done standard marquetry. In other words, with a saw and packet cutting technique. And certain parts, like this text of John 3:16, I would find it too tedious to make out of with a regular saw. So I found that I was combining both the cutting here, which was all done by the my saw, or this letters of God cut out of shell here, to this, which is cut out with a laser, and that worked quite well. So combining both, I have done. My preference is not to use laser because that is more time consuming to program the laser and to do the digital file. And I've been told that with all that work that is involved, it is faster to draw it by hand and cut it out by hand. And usually I'm faster than laser up to 4 copies. If there's more than 4 copies that are required, or 4 complete projects of anything, it is more cost effective to program a laser to have it cut out for you. That's just raw economics. Here was another one where laser really worked. Now, I could have done all these separate pieces with a jig. I had that opportunity to, because there was 2 different sizes. It could be done, but it was so critical for me to line up the top and the bottom exactly, because it had to be a very, very specific size to the 64th of an inch. This was done for a particular client, which was very particular about dimensions. So this one was made with that in mind, and with a laser, you can cut right on the money. With a scroll saw or cutting by hand, or even shaping these individual elements with a jig, if you're off by less than 1/10 of a thousandth of an inch, you'll see the cumulative problem up here at the top if you start assembling. So I elected to cut everything out with a laser, which allowed me to really make a pattern which was exact and which was clean. And it was clean. Actually, this was all cut out by hand. But I could do it here and get away with it. But this one, no, there was just no way we could do that, or I did not want to take the chance. So there are places that I'll use laser. Now, if you look at the work, and this is actually a screenshot of a partial portfolio that I have, which is, you can see at veneerartist.com. I have not only the pictures, but I do have also detail shots and some process shots here on the site for people to see how these things, some of these things were done. So moving on, I have here just a few examples of work. Here's a large cartoon of a bed. And you see that there's a half. I'm sort of going now towards the idea that less is more. Let the wood speak. Everything is designed out. I'm able to work out all my mechanical details. Everything works. And when everything works, I take it into the shop to start cutting wood. You know the adage, if you cut it 3 times and it's still too short, well, maybe you need to look at the drawing again. So with this, you can kind of see that here's the drawing superimposed 3 of these beds. If you recall the packet cutting technique, I'm layering many layers of wood, up to 16 layers of wood on top of each other. When I cut them out, that yields, if all of the pieces are the size of the background, I will yield enough marquetry and parts for 16 complete images that look identical in shape, but they are all different in woods. So the packet cutting technique is really a production technique, which I utilize to my advantage here. You see, here's a walnut background with cattails like this. This one is a madrone background, and this one is a different background. This one is a pollard ash background. So the pollard ash, that when I cut this out, these cattails are pollard ash. So what I didn't use here in this cutout, I used here. So I can interchange all my parts and I can build more of one. So when I cut one, it yields many. So also cutting your own veneer. So cutting your own veneer is really actually fairly simple. It needs a bandsaw that can hold a 3/4 inch blade. This is a wood miser blade that is carbide tipped. This is, it has the ability to cut out, and the back of the blade, as you can see here, the back of the blade has room to wiggle. So it's always cutting a straight line. And there's no drift with this blade. So with that, I can make veneer, and I can do, let's see if this is choppy. Can you hear, can you see it?
Okay.
Okay, was anybody able to see that?
Yes.
Okay. So that was actually, would you like to see it through to the very end?
Okay.
All right, here we go. Let's try it again. Can you also hear the music?
Yes.
Oh, good. Let's see, let's go. There we go. So that was just, I think that some of you have probably seen one of those pieces. I made 4 of them together, all with veneer, mango and koa veneer. And I stack cut and made 4 of these all at the same time. So one of them you saw at the show, there's one in Hawaii, and there's 2 on other gallery walls waiting to be sold. So, which is good. So patterns in wood. This was another one that was made out of many small pieces of koa to simulate a koa weave. I also have here an example of a coffee bean. So it was a picture that was taken of a bunch of coffee beans. From that, I blew it up. I made a drawing of coffee beans. There's a lot of beans here. There's just in this panel, there's like 800 beans. So cutting all of it involved a lot of assembly. Now you can see us actually building 4 of these panels that were square. We're building 4 of them. And then we will then actually take those 4 and seam them together here and to create one large panel, which is looking like this. Now, I guarantee you will not be able to tell that this panel is the same as this panel is the same as this panel, because I was able to put this one right side up, this one was rotated, and this one was flipped. So I was able to take one panel of work, create my pieces, all my packet cut, and then be able to create this pattern. Those beans are about 1.5 inches long. And sometimes you have to get down on it. You notice that the panel actually has a light curve in it. And this curve was actually there for structural and aesthetical purposes. By making it a curve, it allowed the panel to become very stiff. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Okay, continuing. So not only was it aesthetically pleasing, but it was also a structural advantage. That whole panel, you'd be surprised to know that it weighs less than 35 pounds. So it's not very heavy at all. Marquetry, I love what you can do with sand shading. This was a detail off of a small, this is a small rose that was part of a larger table project. And whether the marquetry is, small, like this, here's a lizard table. I think that you may have seen this at some show on the Southland before. This was also on a episode with Tommy Mack. And whether the project is big or it's small, marquetry seems to be a way of enhancing the projects that I would already do as a woodworker. So I was asked by Travis to sort of do a little bit more than the history of marquetry. So I'm going to launch into like compound curves with veneer. That was something that was actually starting to take place quite some time ago. And I was able to start curving veneer. And I said, well, curving veneer, it's pliable. You can bend it around things. You can glue it to things. It's possible to do it. But now I'm thinking about, okay, wall art, we know that. Sculpture, we got that. But how about clothing? That was a new direction. Veneer is pliable. Start taking this is Gertrude. I'm introducing you to Gertrude. She doesn't mind too much when we put thumbtacks in her to hold veneer in place. So I was able to make some forms, and with shrink wrap and veneer, you can make, things that actually are quite pliable and can move with the human body. So possible to do clothing, stuff that actually is comfortable, it moves. Even inside the skirt, there's pleats of wood. And by laminating veneer onto cloth and breaking the fiber of veneer or along the grain, you can make wood that's quite pliable. So this is one that was another dress project, was made out of maple. And one of the things that I really enjoy about this one was it's flow and movement. Now it's going to go slow-mo here, and you can kind of see how that everything moves. It really, it all is fastened onto a flexible kind of a slip, all these pieces of wood, and they're like tiles, which allow the body to move and to expand and to fit different styles. Was really quite beyond our expectation. And it made some good headway over in New York and Milano. So with that, let's see. Why is it doing that? Okay. Once again, here, and then let's move on to the next one. The next one I had was a commission project for Hawaii, and this is actually using micro veneer. This veneer is so thin, it's actually thinner than paper. So it's very, very fragile. But when you laminate it onto silk, it actually becomes something which is pliable and flexible. Even the neck piece, I thought you might enjoy this. That's a woodworking kind of like a latch right here up in the edge that is using to clip the bodice together, and then it can actually unfold, and she can step out of the dress. The scales look like this. This was for the earrings, and of course, nothing is complete without its purse. And the purse is also micro veneered, laminated over leather this time. So it has a leather interior and the wood exterior. And that was a wooden purse that belonged with the ensemble. So my role, my teacher, when I left the shop, he grabs me by the lapels in his Italian way, and he looks at me and he says, "You dumb American, go back to America and bring this technique back. Go teach, do so," because he was a teacher. And so I wrote articles for Fine Woodworking. I also did many articles in other places, Design Inspiration, Woodworking. You've probably seen some things before. This was a piece made out of embulia and different veneers. And, you know, the secret on this one was make the entire drawer face first and then cut it apart with a table saw. I started schurchwoodwork.com, on where I had a store which you could buy veneering supplies. I had classes, which I'm still continuing to teach. The downloads I did here that was, you know, various, video programs. I did a couple of Marquetry DVDs and decorative veneering, and that was to bring the technique on. And I've been, the store has been opened for 20 years. I did close it down 2 years ago because there are other places to get now the supplies. And there are now other teachers that are teaching this technique. And I find that in my, at my career, I'm tending to concentrate more on my own work, but I am also doing occasional teaching. I'll start back up in October. I think I have a class at Mark Adams.
Just onto the back.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if I can line it up and I can kind of sight the hinge.
Okay, there we go. So I hope you enjoyed the show of what I'm doing. Travis, this will go back to you. And I would like to know if anybody has any questions. I'm going to stop my share screen. And thank you so much.